Adam Cohen describes himself as an active design green builder. He holds a degree in architecture from the University of Maryland and may be proudest of his designation as a certified passive house consultant in both North America and Europe. Cohen is one of only a handful of people who have obtained that designation for the energy-saving design standard. A partner with builder Steve Strauss in Structures Design Build, Cohen has created buildings using alternative materials and energy sources. He's traveled extensively to learn about and apply the passive house technique created in Germany. Locally, Cohen is a former member of Roanoke City's Clean and Green Committee. Building more energy-efficient structures is the future, and it's here now, according to Adam Cohen. Adam Cohen, welcome to the interview.
Thank you. Nice
to
be here.
You're a Maryland Terp in college?
Yeah, sure am.
Which can be good and bad. Good in basketball, not as good in football.
Yeah.
But when you were in college, you studied architecture.
Mm-hmm.
How much were they talking back then, I guess 30 plus years ago, how much were they talking about energy-saving techniques, alternative technology while you were studying?
It was huge.
It was, okay.
Absolutely, yeah. When I was in college was kind of Carter administration and the
so we had just come out of the energy crunch.
We were still in, remember we had a second energy crisis in the late 70s. So
right.
Yeah, it was a big deal. And when I actually got out of school, I moved the first week after I graduated from architecture school. I moved to Floyd County and I started building, and I was building off-grid, zero-energy houses. I've got a house that I built 28 years ago. They've never paid an electric bill. It's completely solar. But back then we were using little 75-watt Arco solar panels and VW bug batteries and spit and bubble gum to put them together.
Right.
But they were, and I thought when I got out of school, and I really believed that this is the way that everybody was going to be building in 10 years. That it just made so much sense. And 10 years later, I had a family of 5, and I was just broke.
Right.
I was working for poor hippies who couldn't afford to pay me in Floyd County, and nobody else was interested in what I was doing.
Right.
So that's why I came to Roanoke and started kind of a more traditional building.
I remember, since you mentioned solar, that was really big during the Carter administration. Why hasn't solar, there's always sun, why hasn't solar caught on more? Why aren't there solar panels on every house in the county that can afford to put
It's interesting because the United States was the leader in solar. We invented the technology. We put a lot of money into research. We had a lot of support for it. And what happened was that once the Reagan administration came in, they were really not interested in any kind of lowering of energy usage. They gave lip service like all presidents seem to, but they really actually actively worked against it. So they got rid of a lot of support for research and things like that. And actually solar did continue, but it just moved to other areas of the world. So a lot of the basic research that we've done in solar got picked up by the Germans, by the Spanish. And one of the interesting things is our DOE put lots of money into a technology called concentrating solar, where basically it's just like when you're a little kid with a magnifying glass.
Right.
You have a parabolic mirror, and it concentrates the solar on a tube, which heats up water, drives a turbine, makes electricity. Right? Perfect sense.
Right.
Well, we invented that. We invented that, but we totally dropped our support of it. The Germans and Spanish continued it. They have beautiful concentrating solar plants working. The interesting thing, though, is that here we are, we're 30 years later. California now has mandated that 20% of their grid, the energy feeding into the grid, has to be renewable. And so people are running around trying to figure out how they're going to do that. And there are 5 projects in the California grid that are going to be renewable technologies that are concentrating solar. Of the 5, 4 of them are German and Spanish companies coming over here with their technology, teaming with Americans to get the contract in America. But all the technology, all the stuff is coming from there. And it's really frustrating because you go on the website of these companies, you look up who won the thing, you go on the website of the companies, you look and you see these beautiful, green jobs, right? You got parabolic mirrors, high temperature piping, all these controls, but it's all being made over there and we're importing it. So, we're just short-sighted.
Well, before we get into some of what you're doing, what's your take on wind power? There's a big debate now in Roanoke County about whether they can put turbines on Poor Mountain, but in general, what's your take on wind and its place?
Wind has its place. There is definitely areas of the United States where wind is a huge resource. Virginia is not particularly a huge, great resource. There are some places in Virginia that have a decent amount of wind. You know, wind is a good technology. One of the things that's really interesting about wind, and this is something that like the big picture, a lot of people forget. The nice thing about renewable energy is that the renewable energy field, most of the renewable energy, is not got a lot of fuel cost, right? So there has been, there was an article in Bloomberg maybe a year and a half ago I was reading. It was talking about renewable energy bad for business. I said, well, how can that be, right? So I read it, and what they're talking about is this German company that was one of the leaders in wind. They made their investment in these wind turbines. Mm-hmm. The turbines, you know, they have a big capital outlay to put the turbines up. But besides maintenance, there's no fuel cost. So what they were saying was that because it's a regulated utility and because their profit is tied to their cost of operation, you know, percentage of profit's the same. Mm-hmm. But if they have no fuel cost, their cost of operation goes down. Right. So what they were saying is that renewable energy is bad because it lowers the amount that they can charge for electricity and thus the profit. So the goal of having a regulated utility mm-hmm. is not that we're trying to keep the price down. It's like they want to, you know, burn more coal, burn more whatever, because then they get a percentage on that. They get a percentage bump. Whereas with the renewable,
and the stockholders like it better too.
Right. And once they pay off their capital improvement of that windmill, that besides maintenance, that windmill can crank along for 100 years.
That's why it seems like wind power and maybe solar are sort of at opposite ends of what, you know, utility companies really want to do.
I mean, the utility companies in Virginia are actively working against renewable energy. They're doing everything they can to stop it, and they've been very successful at it.
Mm-hmm. Talk about your evolution to using passive and active solar, things like earth sheltering and healthy home concepts. Talk about your evolution.
Okay, well, passive house is not what you think of like the 1970s passive solar house. Passive house is a German word, Passivhaus. Right. Okay, and
passive house.
Passive house.
Right,
yeah,
passive
and passive in German the connotation is not like it's non-active, and house is more building. Mm-hmm. Okay, so what you end up with is their concept is a building that doesn't require an active heating system was the kind of the concept of it, and what they did was. You know, we, including me, back in the early 80s, were doing super insulated houses. We had a lot of failures in super insulated houses. I was one of the people that had to go back and fix the super insulated houses that were melting because we didn't understand the building physics. Right?
Okay.
Bottom line, we didn't do the physics.
And that's bad when a house melts.
Yeah, it's really bad. A German building physicist and a Swedish building physicist kind of teamed up and said, you know, this should work, but the Americans are just cowboys. They go out and build it without thinking, right? So they spent 5 years doing research and postulating what is the best way to build these super insulated houses so that they do perform. And so that started in '85. In 1990, they built their first prototype building in Germany, and it performed wonderfully. And so what they did, they evolved a system of analysis that allows you to put together the design of a building based on building physics that will perform to an extremely high level of performance, which means using a very little bit amount of energy. Mm. These buildings lower your heating and cooling energy by up to 90%. They lower your overall energy use by 70%. So, and they're incredibly affordable. I mean, they're virtually the same. If you take your energy cost plus your mortgage, they're virtually the same price.
Well, that's why I wanted to ask you, Adam, how feasible is it? I mean, how much extra are you going to have to spend if you build a passive house, a commercial project, or residential structure? How much more initially are you going to have to spend?
Right. Well, let's split it into residential and commercial because those are two different animals. Residential is actually the harder, and as a percentage, the more expensive because they're smaller projects. Mm-hmm. But let me tell you this: when we design and build our passive houses for residential, most Americans pay a mortgage. Most Americans pay an energy bill. These are monthly bills that, you know, it's okay, I paid my mortgage, I paid my electric and gas, whatever. So what we've done is we've developed a system where we can build passive houses for that same monthly cost. The only difference is we're taking money from the energy and putting it into the mortgage. So in essence, instead of paying for electrons that you use and disappear, you're paying for equity. You're buying equity in your house.
Right.
So the monthly outlay is exactly the same. And you're building equity in your house because you're paying for real value, and you're not paying for electrons. So, so as far as that goes, as far as the average homeowner, virtually no difference in terms of the monthly outlay that they're going to have.
Okay.
If you want to talk about it just in terms of gross dollars difference, you're looking at 8 to 10% difference. But with the energy savings we're seeing, we easily pay that off with the additional mortgage. Okay. Now that's the residential side. Put that over here. The commercial side's much more exciting. This is what has really inspired me. When I first discovered Passive House, which was in 2006 or so, and I started reading about it, I said, you know what? The commercial really makes sense. Because of the nature of commercial buildings being kind of larger volumes, where the skin is kind of reduced, the heat loss, heat gain is a different component. So what ends up happening, we're finding with the commercial, is the commercial buildings have these incredible return on investments where if you invest $100,000, your return on investment over time goes up, where you might end up with a 10 to 15% return on investment year one. By year 20, you're making 20% on that initial investment. So you've got an increasing annuity over time. It's incredible.
Has it been a hard sell, or is it getting to be an easier sell, Adam, these days?
Yeah, it's a hard sell. I went around and kind of talked to everybody I can for the last 3-4 years, and now that I've got some on the ground and they're performing, and I'm proving people, you know, there's 30,000 projects in Europe. There's all kinds of data. The Europeans spent millions of dollars studying the passive house technology. They were looking for a way, the Europeans were looking for a way in the EU to implement across the board energy saving buildings, because building energy is about 40% of the total energy of a mix of the US and Europe. So they studied a bunch of different things, and they found out, oh, the passive house methodology is affordable, it's verified, it's repeatable, and so they recommended in 2009 that that become their energy standard. So, the passive house methodology has got this huge amount of data that validates it. The issue, it seems, with us is that, you know, for some reason we think our buildings have electrons that spin in opposite ways or something. You know, like the data from Europe is that's Europe. You know, so we have to get the data here. There's 47 countries that have passive house movements in them now, and what we see in every country is that there's a slow initial uptake where, you know, few projects get on the ground. But what happens is very quickly after the data starts coming in, there's an exponential growth in the curve because, you know, like I said, it's affordable and it's proven. And it seems like, you know, once people see that data and they say, whoa, it really works, it just takes off.
Now you've, I guess you've wound up, since then you've gotten religion, you've, I guess, lectured all over the world on Passive House, and you're one of, what, several dozen people that are certified both in the U.S. and Europe?
I think it's a handful. I think there's only like 5. Yeah, I'm
not certified to Passive House standards?
That have the certified Passive House consultant standard both in North America and Europe.
Okay. And you've designed the first Passive House school, public school in this country? Where is that?
Right, Franklin County, Virginia.
Is it
Rocky
really?
Mountain.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a cutting edge building. It's not just Passive House. This is a really amazing building called the Center for Energy Efficient Design that is a teaching tool for sustainability that has all types of wonderful sustainable things in it.
And are you hoping that that becomes a model for other school systems and other builders?
Yeah. One of the things that's really interesting is if you go to look at the European Union, schools are, I mean, this is what they're building in schools. One of the things about Passive House that's really nice is that it has a very much higher level of indoor air quality than standard construction because it's bringing and delivering 100% outside air, and it's exhausting stale interior air. So you have very low CO2 levels, very good air quality.
And I guess, are you still vice chair of the technical committee in the U.S. for the Passive House Institute?
National Passive House Institute.
Okay. And can you foresee, Adam, where maybe in 5, 10 years, 15 years, that Passive House will be more of a standard in this country, or certain parts of the Passive House methodology?
Well, what will happen and what is happening is that the International Code Council, which writes kind of model codes that then states adopt, there's a model energy code that we in Virginia are using right now. We're on 2009, and they come out every 3 years. So we're under 2009. There'll be 12 is already written. There'll be 15, 18, 21. Well, if you look at kind of the framework for how the code is going to progress, you know, if nothing changes, if they continue to go down the road that they projected, the 2018 code should be hitting about Passive House level, which there's about a 3-year lag of between when it is written and when it's adopted. So maybe by 2020 we'll be hitting at that level. But there's a lot of dangers there in terms of very rarely do things get adopted 100% as written. Right. Typically, each state is lobbied, and special interest wants to make it more affordable or make it easier to do. So what ends up happening, these codes get watered down. So whether or not, I think we'll be building projects like this more and more and more, and that the codes will eventually catch up. But I think what's so amazing about Passive House and where this really will change things is that there's a market case to be made for this Passive House technology. It's affordable. It gives you a great return on investment. If you're any type of an end user, if you're a college and you're building a dorm, I mean, you're going to get your money back in a few years, and you're going to own that dorm for 50 to 100 years. You'll do great. I mean, it's kind of a no-brainer. It's really paradigm changing because of the cost effectiveness of it. So I fully expect that the market will adopt it well before the codes adopt it. And it will be a slow adoption, but it'll happen.
Okay, we're going to have to leave it there. Adam Cohen, talking about Passive House from Structure Design Build. And Adam, thanks for joining us on the interview.
Thank you, Gene. Appreciate it.
This is The Interview. I'm Gene Marrano. We'll be right back.